The box wasn't supposed to be there. My mother was organized obsessively so. Every drawer labeled, every shelf arranged. But this box, buried under winter coats in the back of her closet, had no label, just my name, written in her handwriting. I almost didn't open it. She had been dead for 3 days. I was exhausted, grieving, just trying to get through the afternoon. But something about seeing my name in her handwriting in that place, in that box, made my hand stop moving. Inside, there was one envelope, still sealed. The return address said Stanford University. The postmark said March 14th, 2010. I was 18 years old in March 2010, and my mother told me Stanford never wrote back. My legs gave out. I sat down on her bedroom floor, holding a letter that was addressed to me, that had been in her possession for 14 years, that she never, not once, mentioned. And I realized I didn't know which would destroy me more, opening it or not. I opened it. And every single decision I had made in my adult life, every compromise, every surrender, every moment I told myself this is enough, collapsed into that one page. Because Stanford hadn't just written back, Stanford had offered me a full scholarship, and my mother had kept it in silence for 14 years. I sat there on that cold floor, in that house that still smelled like her, holding the proof that the life I was living was never supposed to be mine. My name is Calla Stroud. I am 32 years old. I teach 7th grade English at Harwick Middle School in a small town in central Ohio called Delphi Falls, population 4,000, 2 gas stations, 1 diner that closes at 8. I have lived here my entire life. I have a small house with yellow shutters that I bought 3 years ago because the mortgage was manageable and the commute was 12 minutes. I have a cat named Fern. I have a best friend named Dessa who brings me wine when I grade papers and never asks why. I look out the window sometimes with that particular expression, the one that isn't quite sadness, but isn't peace either. I had always called it contentment. The honest word I now know is resignation. My mother, Marin Stroud, died on a Tuesday in late October, 58 years old. An aneurysm fast and without warning, the doctor said, as if that was supposed to be merciful. She had been making coffee. The paramedics found her on the kitchen floor with the pot still brewing. The house smelled like dark roast for days after. I couldn't make coffee for a week. I still can't, entirely. She was the kind of woman who sent birthday cards 2 weeks early, who remembered that the neighbor's daughter was allergic to strawberries, who folded dish towels into perfect thirds and grew tomatoes in clay pots on the back porch, and called me every Sunday at 11 in the morning without fail, for as long as I can remember. I had loved her without question, without examination. The way you love the floor beneath your feet, you don't consider it. It's simply there. I was clearing her bedroom on a Friday afternoon. Dessa had offered to come. I told her I needed to do it alone. That was true, but I also didn't know then what I was about to find. So I couldn't have known what I was asking for when I asked to be alone with it. The closet smelled like cedar and Marin, her particular lavender soap. The wool of her good coat, something dry and clean and unbearably familiar. I worked methodically. Shoes boxed, dresses folded, I was doing fine. I was holding myself together with both hands carefully, the way you carry something full to the brim. And then I moved the coats. The box was not large. Maybe the size of a shoebox, but sturdier, deeper. The kind of box that had once held something important and been repurposed. No tape. No label. Just my name. In black ink, in Marin's careful handwriting. Calla. I have asked myself many times since that afternoon why I hesitated. Why I stood in that closet for nearly a full minute before I reached for it. I think, on some wordless level, some part of me already knew. Not the specifics. Not Stanford. Not the scholarship. Not the 14 years. But the shape of it. The weight. The way a sealed door still lets you feel the cold air on the other side. I took the box to her bed. I sat down, I opened it. And the life I thought I had been living ended without a sound. I need to tell you about the girl I was at 18, because she is almost unrecognizable to me now. Not because she was foolish, she wasn't. She was careful. Actually, precise. She kept a planner with color-coded tabs and stayed up past midnight reading books that weren't assigned. Because she wanted to understand things completely, not just well enough. She believed, with the quiet ferocity of someone who has never been told otherwise, that the world would reward that kind of attention. That working hard and wanting something clearly was a kind of contract. That life would honor it. Her name was also Calla Stroud, but she was not yet resigned. Senior year of high school, I applied to 7 universities. I told my mother about 6 of them. Stanford, I kept to myself. Not from shame, but from something more tender than that. Superstition, maybe. The way you don't say a wish out loud because the air might hear it and decide to take it from you. I had read about their creative writing program in a library book with a cracked spine and underlined half of it in pencil. I wrote my application essay in 4 drafts over 3 weeks. I asked my English teacher, Mr. Allard, to review it. He handed it back with 2 small edits and the words, "This is excellent," Calla written at the top in red pen. I still remember the particular quality of the light in his classroom that afternoon. Winter light, pale and slanted and full of possibility. I mailed the application myself. That part matters. I walked to the post office on a Saturday morning in November, envelope in hand, and dropped it through the slot. I felt it leave my fingers. That was the last time I had any control over what happened next. I told Marin about Stanford the night I submitted the application. I remember her expression not alarmed. Exactly, but something shifted behind her eyes. Something that, at the time, I read as pride mixed with worry. She asked how we would afford it. I told her about the financial aid options, about scholarships, about the possibility that the cost might not be what she feared. She nodded slowly. She said, "We'll see." 2 words. That's all. We'll see. I checked the mailbox every day from February onward. Every single day. I would come home from school, drop my bag by the door, and go straight to the mailbox before I even took off my coat. Marin always got home after me. She worked at the county clerk's office until 5, so I was always first to the mail. Except, I now understand, not always. Not on the days that mattered. March came, mid-March passed. I told myself that late responses weren't rejections. I checked acceptance timelines on forums. I read other students' posts about waiting. I told myself to be patient. I was patient. I was so patient I nearly made peace with silence. And then one evening in late March, Marin sat down across from me at the kitchen table with a particular softness in her face. The expression she wore when she was delivering something difficult in the gentlest possible way. And she said that she had called the admissions office on my behalf just to check. She said the woman she spoke to confirmed that all decisions had gone out, and that if I hadn't received anything, it likely meant I hadn't been selected. She said she was sorry. She touched my hand, she told me that Ohio State had a wonderful program and that being close to home wasn't a failure. I believed her. Of course I believed her. She was my mother. She had called on my behalf. She was sorry. She was holding my hand at the kitchen table in the house where I had grown up, in the town where everyone knew my name, and she was sorry. I cried for 2 days. Then I applied to Ohio State. I got in, I went. I studied literature, graduated with honors, got certified to teach, came back to Delphi Falls because the position was available and the rent was reasonable and Marin had a spare room if I needed it while I saved up. I saved up. I bought the yellow house. I taught 7th grade. I called her every Sunday at 11. And somewhere in the back of a closet, under winter coats, in a box with my name on it, a letter sat sealed for 14 years. Here's what I want to ask you. Wherever you're watching this from right now, have you ever made a decision that shaped your entire life, not knowing it was based on a lie? Leave a comment below, because I think more of us have than we realize. I just didn't know mine had a return address. The scholarship letter offered full tuition, housing, and a stipend for books and living expenses. I had been fully funded. All I had to do was say yes. And someone decided I never needed to know that choice existed. That someone made my lunch, braided my hair when I was 7, sang off-key to the radio on long drives, loved me. I had always believed more than anything in the world. I sat on her bedroom floor until the light changed. I drove home from Marin's house that Friday night with the letter on the passenger seat. I didn't put it in my bag. I didn't fold it back into the envelope. I just laid it flat on the seat beside me, face up, like a passenger, like it had somewhere to be. The drive is 12 minutes. I know every turn by memory, the bend past the water tower, the stoplight at Clement and 5th, that takes too long. The left onto Birch where my yellow house sits at the end of the block, with the porch light I always leave on. 12 minutes, I had driven that route hundreds of times without thinking. That night, I felt every second of it. The letter sat there in the dark, faintly illuminated by passing streetlights. And I drove and said nothing and thought nothing that was fully formed. Just static. Just the hum of something enormous, trying to fit inside a very small space. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea. I didn't drink and read the letter 11 times. I know it was 11 because I counted somewhere around the 5th read, and kept counting after that. The language was formal and warm in the specific way that institutional letters from good universities are warm, measured enthusiasm. Careful congratulations. A list of next steps that assumed I would be thrilled. That assumed I would respond promptly. That assumed I had received this letter in March of 2010 when I was 18 and the whole shape of my life was still unset. We are pleased to offer you admission to the class of 2014, it said, along with a full merit scholarship covering tuition, housing, and academic expenses for 4 years of undergraduate study. 4 years, fully covered. They had chosen me. I put the letter down and looked at my kitchen. Really looked at it, maybe for the first time in years. The yellow walls I had painted myself the first week I moved in, proud of the color, proud of the independence it represented. The corkboard by the door covered in student papers and grocery. Lists and a photo of Dessa and me at her cousin's wedding 2 summers ago. Both of us laughing at something just outside the frame. The stack of ungraded essays on the counter. The cat calendar. The modest, tidy, carefully assembled life of a woman who had made the best of what she believed she'd been given. And I thought, none of this was supposed to be mine. That thought arrived quietly. Then it arrived again, louder. Then it split open. I want to be precise about the anger because I think it is important to name it correctly. It did not arrive as heat. It arrived as cold. A specific, clarifying cold. The kind that doesn't make you shake but makes everything sharper. I sat in my quiet kitchen at 2 in the morning and I felt my entire adult life reorganize itself around a single fixed point. A lie told to an 18-year-old girl by the one person she trusted absolutely. I thought about my college years in Ohio. Fine years. Genuinely fine. With real friendships and real learning and nothing to be ashamed of. But I had always felt like I was on the wrong platform, waiting for a train that somehow never quite came. I had called that feeling sensitivity, overthinking. I had read books about contentment, and practiced gratitude and told myself that wanting more was a kind of ingratitude. I had made peace with the life I had because I believed it was the life I had chosen. I had chosen nothing. The choice had been made for me, without my knowledge. In a kitchen, probably much like this one, by a woman who folded dish towels in thirds and called every Sunday at 11, I thought about the teaching job. I almost didn't take a position in Columbus that paid better. That would have moved me closer to a city. That I turned down because Marin had been recently diagnosed with high blood pressure, and I told myself she needed me nearby. I thought about the relationship I ended at 27 with a man named Joel who had been offered a position in Seattle and asked me to come. I had said no. I had said my life was here. I had believed that entirely, and I had cried about it for months after. And I had eventually called it maturity, the ability to let go of what you want for the sake of what is real. What if none of those were my choices either? That question opened a door I wasn't ready for. But I walked through it anyway, because there was no going back to the woman who didn't know. She was gone now. She had died on her mother's bedroom floor, holding a 14-year-old letter, and whoever I was going to be next hadn't been decided yet. I picked up my phone. I texted Dessa, "I need you tomorrow." Something happened. She responded within a minute. "Even at that hour, I'm here. What's wrong?" I stared at the screen for a long time. "I don't know where to start." I finally wrote, "Start anywhere," she said. "I'll follow." Dessa arrived at 9 the next morning with coffee and the particular expression she wears when she has already decided to be steady for someone, chin slightly forward, eyes open and unafraid. I had known her since the 3rd grade. She had seen me through my father leaving when I was 11, through college, through Joel, through every version of myself that needed witnessing. I handed her the letter at the door without saying anything. She read it standing in my entryway, still in her coat, and when she finished, she looked up at me and said, very quietly, "Kala," just my name. But the way she said it held everything. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. I told her all of it. The mailbox vigil, the evening at the table, Marin's hand on mine. The we'll see and the soft apology and the careful redirection. Toward Ohio State, Dessa listened without interrupting, which is her particular gift. When I finished, she set down her cup and said, "Do you think this was the only time?" I didn't answer, but the question stayed. That afternoon, we went back to Marin's house together. I wasn't ready to be there alone again. The cedar smell, the lavender, the coffee I still couldn't make. But I needed to look with different eyes now. Not the eyes of a grieving daughter cataloging belongings. The eyes of someone trying to understand who Marin Stroud actually was beneath the dish towels and the Sunday calls and the careful, constant presence. We started with the people who had known her longest. Marin's next-door neighbor, a woman named Ruth Paley, had lived beside her for 22 years. Ruth was 70, sharp, and had the particular candor of someone who has outlived the need to soften things. She invited us in for tea and spoke about Marin with genuine affection and genuine unease in equal measure. "She loved you more than was comfortable to watch sometimes," Ruth said, turning her cup in her hands. "I used to see her from the window. When you'd leave after a visit, she'd stand on the porch until your car was completely out of sight. Every single time. Like she was afraid if she looked away, you'd disappear." I had always found that touching. I reframed it, sitting in Ruth's kitchen, as something else entirely. Ruth told me other things. That Marin had mentioned years ago. That she had intercepted a phone call from a man I had been seeing in my mid-20s, a man named Patrick, whom I remembered as having simply gone distant and then silent without explanation. Ruth hadn't understood the significance at the time. Marin had mentioned it casually, almost proudly, as though she had protected me from something. "She said he wasn't right for you," Ruth told me. She seemed certain of it. Patrick had not been wrong for me. He had been interested in a position out of state. I know that now because I found him years later on a professional directory. He had moved to Portland, built a career, started a family. He had tried to call me, apparently, and been told by whom. I now had to wonder that I wasn't interested. Dessa drove us to my Aunt Carol's house that evening. Carol is Marin's younger sister, the only surviving member of that generation, and she lives 40 minutes outside of Delphi. Falls in a ranch house with wind chimes on the porch that never stop moving. She greeted us with red eyes and leftover casserole, and we sat in her living room while the wind chimes rang faintly through the walls. Carol did not speak easily about Marin, but she spoke honestly. She told us about their childhood, a mother who left when Marin was 9, a father who stayed but was absent in every way that mattered. Marin decided very young, Carol said, that if she held on tight enough to the people she loved, they couldn't leave. She didn't see it as control. She saw it as survival. She paused. She looked at her hands. When you were born, she continued, she told me you were the first person she had ever loved who couldn't choose to leave. Not yet. And I think some part of her never let go of that. Never let you grow past being the person who couldn't go. The wind chimes rang. Dessa reached over and took my hand. I thought about Marin at 9 years old, watching a door close behind someone who should have stayed. I thought about the fear that kind of wound leaves the way it calcifies over decades into something that looks like love. That functions like love in almost every visible way, but is secretly, structurally, built to hold rather than to free. I understood her. Sitting in Carol's living room, I understood her completely, and it made everything so much harder. Because rage is simple when the person who hurt you is simply cruel. Marin was not cruel. Marin was terrified. And she had spent 32 years making sure her fear had somewhere to live, and that somewhere had been me. I went home that night and made a list. I know that sounds clinical. I know grief is supposed to be formless, supposed to move through you like weather, rather than sit still long enough to be cataloged. But I am a teacher. I organize things when I am frightened. I color code and I outline and I write things down in columns because the page holds still when nothing else will. So I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and I made a list of every moment in my adult life where something had slipped away without a clean explanation. Every door that had closed too quietly, every silence that had arrived where a response should have been. It took me 3 hours. The list covered 4 pages. Dessa came back the next morning and we went through it together. Methodically, the way you audit something, not looking for what you want to find, but for what is actually there. Some items were ordinary, some were coincidence, but some had a specific texture, a particular shape that I was beginning to recognize. The shape of a hand, intervening just before I could reach. The Columbus job was on the list. I had applied through an online portal in the spring of my 26th year, a curriculum coordinator position that would have tripled my salary and moved me 2 hours east. I had received what I believed was a form rejection, brief and impersonal. I had accepted it without question because rejections were familiar by then. I had learned, by 26, not to be surprised when things didn't come through. I called the school district that Monday morning. I asked to speak with someone in human resources. I explained, carefully, that I was following up on a very old application that I had personal reasons for wanting to understand what had happened. The woman I spoke to was patient and thorough. She came back after several minutes and told me that their records showed the position had been offered to a finalist, that a previous applicant had withdrawn, and that my file contained a note indicating I had called to withdraw my application before the interview stage. I had never called. I had never withdrawn. I sat in my car in the school parking lot after that phone call and stared at the steering wheel for a very long time. Over the following week, Dessa and I reconstructed what we could. Some things were impossible to verify. Too old, records gone, people moved on. But enough remained. A graduate program application I had mentioned to Marin, and then, somehow, never followed through on. I found the program's old correspondence file through an archive request and discovered my application had been submitted, but then formally withdrawn via email from an address I didn't recognize but that used a variation of my name. A job fair in Cincinnati I had planned to attend at 24 that Marin had talked me out of. Gently, over dinner the night before, she had seemed tired, had mentioned her back was bothering her, had not asked me to stay, but had looked at me in that particular way until I offered to stay myself. Piece by piece, quiet and systematic and invisible. She had not done it with malice. I kept returning to that, kept pressing on it like a bruise to see if it still hurt. Carol's words stayed with me. She saw it as survival. Marin had not constructed an elaborate conspiracy. She had simply, consistently, over years and years, redirected, removed. Gently closed doors she was afraid would take me through them. She had done it the way she did everything carefully, without drama, so that nothing ever looked like what it was. And I had trusted her. That was the part I kept circling. I had trusted her so completely that I had not questioned the withdrawals, the rejections, the silences. I had absorbed them as facts about myself that I wasn't quite good enough, or quite brave enough. Or that maybe I simply belonged here. In this town, in this small and manageable life, she had let me believe that. She had, perhaps, needed me to believe it. I want to stop here for a moment and ask you something directly, because I think this story is hitting differently for some of you than for others. Have you ever looked back at a decision and wondered how much of it was actually yours? Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what came up for you. Because what I've learned is that the most effective control never announces itself. It just feels like your own life. The list on my yellow legal pad had 31 items by the end of that week. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned the page over so I didn't have to see it anymore. And that's when Dessa found the diary. It was in the drawer of Marin's bedside table, small, cloth-covered dark green, the kind that locks with a tiny brass clasp. The clasp was not locked. The diary was small enough to fit in one hand. Dark green cloth, slightly worn at the corners, with a ribbon bookmark the color of old cream. Dessa held it out to me without a word. And I took it the way you take something you are not sure you have the right to hold carefully, with both hands as though the weight of it might shift unexpectedly. I did not open it that night. I carried it home in my bag and set it on the kitchen table and looked at it while Fern circled my ankles and the house settled into its ordinary evening sounds. I made dinner I didn't eat. I graded to papers I don't remember grading. And then, somewhere around 10 o'clock, I sat down, unclasped the small brass closure, and began. Marin had kept the diary for 11 years. The first entry was dated January of 2012, 2 years after the Stanford letter, 1 year after I had finished my first semester at Ohio State and come home for winter break with a new haircut and a quieter version of the ambition she had redirected. The handwriting in those early pages was neat and controlled. The same handwriting I had seen on the box in the closet. Sentences that moved in straight lines. Margins respected. She wrote about ordinary things at first. Work, the garden, a neighbor's illness. She wrote about me the way a person writes about whether present, significant, constant. Kella came for Sunday dinner. She seems tired. I made her favorite soup. She looked better when she left. Entry after entry with that particular quality, observant, tender, and slightly proprietary, as though my emotional state was a condition she was responsible for monitoring. I read slowly. I was looking for the moment the tone shifted, because I could feel it coming the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. It arrived in an entry from the spring of 2014, the year I graduated, the year I came back to Delphi Falls. She could have gone anywhere, Marin wrote. She doesn't know that, but I do. And I think, sometimes, that the not knowing is a kindness. She is happy here. She fits here. She would have been so far away. I put the diary down. I breathed for a moment, then I kept reading. The entries grew more candid as the years progressed, the way a private document does when the writer begins to trust its privacy completely, when the act of writing becomes less recording and more confessing. By 2016, Marin was writing with a looseness, an intimacy with her own interior life that she had never shown me in person. She wrote about her childhood, about her mother leaving, about the specific quality of the silence that followed, how it had lived inside her ever since like a held breath, waiting to be released by something she could never quite name. She wrote about my father leaving, about the night he drove away with 2 suitcases and a set of excuses she had rehearsed responding to for years, about watching 7-year-old Calla stand at the window and wave at a car that didn't slow down. I promised her that night, she wrote. Not out loud, but I promised. No one was ever going to leave her like that again. I would make sure of it, whatever it cost. I understood. Reading that, what I was really holding, not a villain's confession. Something far more complicated, a document of a woman who had decided, before I was old enough to consent to anything, that her love was going to be the thing that protected me from loss, and who had never once stopped to ask whether protection, at that scale, is distinguishable from captivity. She wrote about the Columbus job, about the graduate program, about Patrick more than I expected, with a guilt that surprised me in its clarity. I know what I did wasn't right, she wrote in an entry from 2019. I know it, but I also know she is here, and she is safe, and I can see her on Sundays, and that has to count for something. That has to be worth something. I closed the diary at midnight. My hands were trembling slightly, not from cold, but from the specific exhaustion of sustained comprehension, of holding 2 contradictory truths at once without letting either one go. Marin had loved me profoundly and genuinely. Marin had also, with that same love as instrument, dismantled the life I was supposed to build. Both things were true. Both things were real. And neither one canceled the other out. I opened the diary to the final entry. I needed to know what she had been thinking at the end, before the coffee, before the kitchen floor, before everything stopped. The last entry was dated 4 days before she died. I read the first line. Then I stopped breathing entirely. The last entry was dated October 19th, 4 days before she died. I know the date by heart now. I will probably always know it, the way you memorize the coordinates of a place where something irreversible happened. October 19th, a Thursday. She would have been home from work by 5:30, changed out of her work clothes, watered the tomatoes even though they were nearly done for the season. She would have made tea. She would have sat, perhaps, at the kitchen table, perhaps in the chair by the window, and she would have opened this small green book and she would have written what she wrote. I read it 3 times before the meaning settled fully. Then I set the diary on the bed beside me and sat very still in the silence of her house and let it land. The entry was not long. Marin was not a woman who wrote at length when brevity would serve. That was true of her in life and true of her in these pages. For paragraphs, clear and quiet and devastating. She wrote that she had been thinking about the box in the closet, that she had been thinking about it more frequently in recent months. She did not say why, did not mention any premonition or diagnosis, perhaps had none. Perhaps it was simply the mathematics of accumulation. The way certain secrets gain weight over time until the carrier feels them even while sleeping. She wrote that she had moved the box twice in 14 years. Once when she repainted the bedroom. Once when the closet shelf needed repair. And that each time she had held it briefly and considered, and each time had put it back. She wrote, "I've never been able to decide if I kept it out of guilt or out of hope. I think it may have been both. I think I believed, for a long time, that I would find the right moment to tell her. That there would be a version of the conversation I could survive. That she would understand, eventually. That everything I did came from the same place. From not being able to bear the thought of losing her the way I lost everything else." Then she wrote, "There is no right moment. I know that now. There never was. And I am too old and too tired and too frightened of her face to make it right. So I will leave it where it is, and I will hope, as I have always hoped, that she never goes looking." And then the final line, "I hope she never finds that letter." 7 words. Written 4 days before, her heart gave out in a kitchen that smelled like dark roast coffee on an ordinary Tuesday morning. At 58 years old, she had died knowing. She had looked at the weight of what she had done and decided, in the end, that silence was still preferable to the conversation she was afraid to have. She had chosen her own comfort, her own terror, her own fragile peace over my right to know. Even at the end, even after 14 years of a guilt she had documented in her own handwriting, she had chosen to let the lie stand. I sat in her bedroom for a very long time. Outside, the October wind moved through the trees in the backyard. The maple she had planted the year I was born. Now enormous branches, scraping the roof in the particular way that had been the sound of childhood storms. Fern was at home. Dessa didn't know I was there. It was just me and the diary and the maple and the smell of lavender that still lived in the walls of that house, no matter how many windows I opened. I thought about the 9-year-old girl who watched her mother leave. I thought about the young woman who stood at a door with 2 suitcases and made a silent promise to the child at the window. I thought about all the years of careful, terrified love that had accumulated into 7 words on a diary page. Into a box with no label. Into a sealed envelope that had outlasted her. I did not cry. I had expected to. But what arrived instead was something quieter and more permanent. The specific grief of fully understanding something you cannot unknow. The grief of seeing a person completely, without flattery or fury, and finding them to be exactly as complicated as people are. No more monstrous, no less human. She had been afraid her whole life. She had loved me her whole life. And she had never once found a way to let those 2 things exist without the first one destroying the second. I closed the diary. I held it in both hands for a moment, then I set it gently on the bed, stood up, and walked to the window. The maple was enormous. She had planted it the year I was born. She had told me once because she wanted me to have something that would outlast both of us. I wondered, standing there, if she had understood the cruelty of that particular gift. Something designed to outlast in a life she had spent 14 years making sure would never leave. I pulled out my phone. I opened a browser. I typed 2 words into the search bar. Stanford admissions. The website loaded slowly, or maybe it just felt slow because my pulse was louder than the hum of the refrigerator, louder than the October wind against the window pane. A clean white page, polished, professional. Updated since the year of my letter, but unmistakably the same institution that had offered me a life I never lived. Undergraduate admissions, it said. Beneath that, an email address. A phone number. A contact form calling out in neutral typography. Ready to receive words from anyone. Even a woman 3 decades old who should have walked through that door 14 years earlier but never had the chance. I sat at Marin's desk with her diary beside me and the letter propped against the lamp. The 2 artifacts faced each other across time. One, an invitation, the other, an apology she'd never voiced. The contrast hurt to look at. I typed half a sentence, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. What do you even say in a situation like this? My mother intercepted my acceptance 14 years ago, and now I just want you to know. Too sentimental. I was accepted once, and I'm wondering if there's still a path for me somehow. Too naive. I stared and listened to the long, slow creak of the house around me, the floor expanding. The wind brushing against the clapboard siding until the words finally came. My name is Calla Stroud. I applied to Stanford in 2010. I recently discovered that I was offered admission and a full scholarship, but I never received the letter. It was kept from me. I'm not writing for restitution. I'm writing because I'd like to know if there is still a way forward. I hit send before I could think about it too much. Because thinking was what had let me remain silent for years. The sound when the email left a small click was barely audible, but it felt enormous. Like dropping something heavy into water and hearing it vanish beneath the surface. I leaned back, hands trembling slightly. For the first time since finding the box, I felt motion. Not relief, not victory, just movement. Maybe that was enough for now. Dessa came by later, and I showed her the email. She read it silently and nodded. Whether they respond or not, she said, "You already took something back." She was right. Stanford's reply wasn't the point anymore. It was the act sending something into the world that belonged to me again. We spent that evening closing up Marin's house, boxing final things. Her sweaters, her notebooks, the framed photograph of us at Niagara Falls when I was 12. I had been afraid to step inside that memory, the mother smiling behind sunglasses. Her arm around a girl who thought love meant safety and safety meant staying. But I found that seeing it didn't hurt the way I expected. It just felt transparent, honest. Like looking through glass instead of fog. Night settled early, cool and blue. I stood on the porch before leaving, staring out at the maple tree and its thin scatter of fallen leaves. For 32 years, I had defined myself in relation to Miranda. Caregiver, anchor, excuse. Every direction I faced led back to her. Now, for the first time, there was an open road that didn't. That realization scared me. But fear, I was learning, wasn't always a warning. Sometimes it was just the sensation of possibility. As we packed the car, Dessa asked, "So, what now? What do you do with all this?" I looked at her, at the streetlights curving into the distance, at the small plain sky above this town that had been my entire world. "I think I started choosing," I said quietly. For real this time. I didn't know what that meant: school travel. Something entirely different, but I knew it would be mine, not hers. And here's my honest question to you watching right now. If you found out the life you're living was built on someone else's decision, what would be the first choice you made for yourself? Where would you start over? Tell me, because asking that out loud is how beginnings happen. The diary stayed in my bag on the drive home. I didn't return it to the drawer, didn't burn it either. It was evidence and confession and inheritance, all at once. I wasn't ready to let it go. But for the first time, when I thought about Marin, I didn't picture a locked door. I pictured the hand that could open it. Bloco 9 Perdão impossível de e-mail reply came 10 days later. A polite message from an admissions counselor who had researched my file and confirmed its existence. Yes, Kala, you were admitted in 2010 with a full merit scholarship. I'm truly sorry for what happened. While it's not possible to revive that offer, Stanford has continuing education routes for mature students. If you ever want to apply again, we'd be honored to assist. I read it twice. Then I smiled, small, unsteady, real. Not because the door reopened, but because the record existed. Because the world finally knew. Because history, after 14 years of silence, had decided to acknowledge me. The truth was no longer buried in a box behind winter coats. It was out in the light. Days stretched into weeks. I went back to work. My students returned from fall break with stories about haunted houses and Halloween candy. The rhythm of normal life resumed methodically, as if nothing monumental had happened within me. But every ordinary detail now held a new contour. The smell of chalk dust, the sound of lockers slamming, the flicker of late afternoon sun across the bulletin board. This was still my life. But it wasn't built on resignation. Anymore, it was rebuilt on choice. One afternoon, between classes, I looked out the window and saw the bus pull away from the school. The road ran west, toward everything I hadn't done. I didn't feel regret anymore. Just space. Empty, open space with room for something new to grow. Forgiveness? Though no. That word didn't fit. Forgiveness to me implies erasure. The idea that you can release something by pretending it doesn't still exist inside you. I couldn't do that. The damage was too embedded. The love too intertwined. But I could do something else. I could let it matter without letting it rule me. That night, I went back to Marin's house one last time. The air was colder now. The trees barer. The rooms echoing with that hollow quiet of a place that hasn't decided whether it's waiting or done. I walked to the yard, to the maple tree she had planted the year I was born. Its leaves were mostly gone, its bark rough beneath my palm. I pressed the diary against the trunk for a moment, then set it at the roots. "I can't forgive you," I whispered, "but I can stop fighting you." The wind shifted through the branches. A leaf fell and brushed my shoulder, a small, nothing gesture, but it almost felt like an answer. Driving home, I realized how strange grief is. It doesn't close like a book. It expands until it no longer hurts to hold. You just live inside it differently. When I got home, I made coffee for the first time since she'd died. The smell filled the kitchen, and this time, I didn't turn away. I stood there breathing it in, letting it be both memory and present, familiar and new. The phone rang. Dessa, checking in, probably. I didn't answer. I just watched the steam rise from the cup and thought about the young woman Marin never let me be, and the one I still might become. I don't know yet what comes next. Maybe graduate school, maybe a move. Maybe simply waking up every morning knowing that every step I take, even the wrong ones, belong entirely to me. I'm 32 years old, and for the first time, my life feels unscripted. Maybe that's what freedom actually is. Not peace, not even forgiveness, but ownership. The ability to say, this is mine. The choice, the consequence, the unknown. All mine. I chose to tell this story because I couldn't stop thinking about what happens after the truth finally arrives. Not the explosion, not the tears, but the quiet rebuild. If you're still here, listening, I hope you find the strength to choose your own road, even if it's late. Especially if it's late.